In a fiery press briefing, newly appointed White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt delivers a devastating takedown of Karine Jean-Pierre, calling out her tenure as nothing more than a decorative figure in the White House. Leavitt, appointed by President Donald Trump, makes it clear that America is back on track and promises that Trump's leadership will be the greatest tenure the U.S. has ever seen. With a bold and unapologetic approach, she leaves the audience in total shock and amazement. Watch as Leavitt exposes the truth and sets the tone for a new era in the White House. The room was packed, journalists, cameramen, political analysts, all waiting for the morning press briefing to begin. A hush fell over the crowd as the doors swung open. Karoline Leavitt walked in, radiating confidence. Her presence was commanding, a stark contrast to the timid and uncertain energy that once filled the space. She took her place at the podium, cleared her throat, and looked across the room. No teleprompter, no scripted responses, just her and the truth. "Good morning," she began, her voice firm yet composed. "For too long, the American people have been misled, lied to, and fed nothing but excuses. That ends today." The reporters exchanged glances. This was not the usual diplomatic tone. This was something else, something raw, something real. She adjusted the mic and took a deep breath. "Let's talk about the past." A single moment of silence hung in the air, the weight of her words pressing down on every person in the room. And then, she dropped the bombshell. For 2 years, the American people have been told that the White House press briefings were a place for truth and transparency. She let out a small chuckle, shaking her head. But what we really got was a stage performance, a show, a scripted act. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some journalists scribbled frantically, others just stared. "I will say what no one else has dared to say," Karoline continued. Karine Jean-Pierre was not a press secretary. She was a symbol, a decorative piece carefully placed in front of cameras to appease, not to inform. A gasp came from the crowd. The cameras zoomed in. Some reporters shook their heads in disbelief. She read from a binder. She dodged questions. She repeated the same tired lines while America suffered. Inflation, crime, the border crisis. These were real issues that deserved real answers. But what did we get instead? She paused. Silence. The weight of her words filled the room like an unbearable tension. The air felt thick. I refused to stand here and do the same. The room was in shock. No one had expected her to be this blunt, this unfiltered. But she wasn't done yet. Karoline leaned forward, gripping the podium. Her voice, now edged with emotion, cracked through the silence. The American people don't need a figurehead who only shows up for photo ops. They need leadership. They need strength. And they need the truth. She scanned the room, her eyes locking onto familiar faces. Reporters who had, for years, been part of the old game, asking the same rehearsed questions, accepting the same meaningless answers. But now, she continued, we have a president who actually delivers. The murmurs turned into a quiet roar. Some reporters whispered among themselves. Others kept their pens down, too stunned to move. President Trump doesn't hide from the tough questions. He doesn't dodge responsibility. He is here to rebuild, to lead, and to put America first again. Karoline's voice grew stronger. His tenure will not be about illusions. It will be about action. It will be about restoring the strength of this country, returning power to the people, and making sure that the White House stands as a beacon of hope once again. The emotion in her voice was palpable. Some in the audience swallowed hard, others shifted in their seats uncomfortably. For the first time in years, the press room didn't feel like a staged performance. It felt like a reckoning, and Karoline was just getting started. Karoline inhaled sharply, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Every camera in the room was locked onto her, every reporter waiting to see if she would stumble. but she didn't. "I want to be clear," she said, her voice unwavering. For years, the American people were led to believe that competence was standing behind this podium, answering questions, and providing transparency. But what we really got was illusion. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the sides of the podium. Karine Jean-Pierre wasn't here to serve the American people. She was here to play a role, a figurehead who smiled and read pre-written lines, while chaos unfolded outside this very building. The air grew thick with tension. Some reporters looked uncomfortable. Others looked guilty. "This is not about politics. This is about truth," Karoline continued. While Americans struggled, Karine dodged. While families lost their livelihoods, Karine read scripted responses. And while our country spiraled, she stood here with a binder full of empty promises. The silence in the room was suffocating. This is not how a country should be run. And under President Trump, this will never happen again. A reporter raised his hand, but she wasn't finished yet. Karoline exhaled, her pulse steady. She had spent years watching press briefings from the sidelines, frustrated, waiting for someone to say what needed to be said. But no one ever did. Until now. For too long, the American people have been told to accept less, she continued. Lower expectations, higher prices, more crime. They were told, "This is just how it is." She shook her head. No, that was a lie. A murmur spread through the room, but she pushed forward. "Do you know what real leadership looks like? It looks like a president who isn't afraid of the tough questions. A president who doesn't need a binder to tell him what to say. A president who gets up every morning thinking about how to make life better for the American people." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. President Trump is not here to appease the media. He is not here to play politics. He is here to lead. A hush settled over the press room. No one was looking at their notes anymore. No one was whispering. For the first time in years, they were listening. Karoline adjusted the mic, her next words sharper than ever. "I will not stand here and pretend that the last administration did everything right, because they didn't, and America paid the price for their failures." She gestured toward the cameras. Families lost their savings. Parents couldn't afford groceries. Our streets became more dangerous. And while all of this happened, what did the previous administration do? She let the question linger. They smiled for the cameras. The reporters fidgeted. Some shifted in their seats. Some swallowed hard. Karoline's voice dropped lower, more controlled. There are mothers in this country who had to bury their children because of policies that allowed crime to flourish. There are fathers who had to work 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. There are veterans who fought for this country, only to be abandoned by their own government. A lump formed in her throat, but she forced it down. No more. She straightened her shoulders. The American people deserve better. And under President Trump, they will get better. The silence in the room was absolute. And just like that, the press briefing was no longer just a press briefing. It was a reckoning. The press room was no longer just a stage for rehearsed responses. It had become a battleground. Karoline Leavitt stood firm, unshaken by the tension in the air. "The truth isn't always easy to hear," she continued, her gaze piercing through the room. "But it must be said, under the previous administration, this country was run on deception. The American people were told that everything was fine, even as they watched their grocery bills double, their neighborhoods become unsafe, and their freedoms shrink." A ripple of discomfort spread across the reporters. Some shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Karine Jean-Pierre wasn't just a press secretary. She was a shield, a carefully chosen face meant to pacify the media, while the real damage happened behind closed doors. Gasps echoed through the room. The cameras zoomed in. She was placed here to make the American people feel comforted. while nothing was being done to actually improve their lives. That is not leadership. That is manipulation. A moment of silence. Then Karoline raised her chin. America is done being lied to. The era of deception is over. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Karoline took a slow breath, gripping the podium tighter. The energy in the room had shifted. It was no longer just a press briefing. It was an awakening. "I've spoken to real Americans," she said, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. Mothers who have to choose between paying rent and feeding their children. Veterans who feel forgotten by the country they fought for. Families torn apart by crime, by an open border, by policies that put politics over people. A lump formed in her throat, but she pushed through it. And while these families suffered, what did we see from the White House? She didn't need to answer. Everyone knew. She inhaled sharply. "I refuse to be another talking head. I refuse to stand here and insult the intelligence of the American people with scripted, meaningless responses." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't let it falter. Because when a mother is crying at night, wondering how she will feed her child, she doesn't need empty words. She needs action. Tears welled in the eyes of some reporters. Some looked down, ashamed. The weight of reality had finally sunk in. Karoline steadied herself, and that is what President Trump is here to do. The room held its breath. Karoline's voice dropped to a near whisper, but somehow it was even more powerful that way. "The American people don't just need change," she said. "They deserve it." The reporters, some of whom had once smirked at Trump's name, sat frozen. The truth was undeniable now. President Trump was not elected to make friends in Washington. He was elected to make a difference, and I will stand at this podium every single day, answering every single question, without hiding behind scripted notes or political games. A pause. Because this is not about politics. This is about the soul of this nation. The press room had never been so still. Even the most hardened reporters felt their throats tighten. The weight of everything, the last few years, the deception, the struggles, was unbearable. Karoline exhaled slowly. President Trump is not here to play. He is here to rebuild America. And whether you like him or not, you cannot deny that the American people deserve that. A single tear slipped down the cheek of a journalist in the front row. The room remained silent. For the first time in years, the truth had been spoken, and nothing would ever be the same again. Karoline steadied herself, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She could feel it, the shift in the room. No one was looking at her with the usual skepticism, no smirks, no rolling eyes. The weight of her words had sunk in. She cleared her throat, her next words slicing through the air like a knife. Karine Jean-Pierre was not just a press secretary who failed. She was a symbol of an administration that prioritized optics over action. Gasps rippled through the press room. Some reporters furiously scribbled notes, others exchanged nervous glances. She came here day after day, reading from her pre-written binder while the American people begged for real answers. When the border crisis reached record levels, what did she do? Flip through pages. When inflation crushed middle-class families, what did she do? Laugh it off. When crime skyrocketed, what did she do? She let the silence answer for her. She did nothing. Tears welled in the eyes of some viewers watching live. Even hardened political journalists found themselves swallowing a lump in their throats. Karoline leaned in, voice unwavering. America deserves better than a government that treats them like fools. And she meant it. A veteran journalist in the front row, one who had spent years covering the White House, cleared his throat. His hands trembled as he lifted his pen. "Miss Leavitt," he said hesitantly, "are you saying the previous administration intentionally misled the American people?" Karoline met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm not saying it," she replied. I'm proving it. The air felt electric. The previous administration ran on excuses. Every time they failed, they pointed fingers. The border crisis? Blamed on the last president. Inflation? Blamed on corporations. Rising crime? Blamed on police departments instead of criminals. She shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. And while they played their blame game, Americans suffered. Mothers cried at empty refrigerators. Small business owners watched their dreams crumble. Families prayed their children wouldn't get caught in the crossfire of rising violence. A reporter wiped his eyes. Another swallowed hard. Karoline clenched the podium. They didn't just mislead America. They betrayed it. For the first time in years, a press secretary wasn't standing behind the podium making excuses. She was telling the truth. Karoline exhaled, her heart pounding. But she wasn't nervous. She was determined. President Trump was not elected to make Washington elites comfortable. He was elected to fix what they broke. The silence in the room was deafening. For too long, the media painted him as the villain. But tell me, when was America stronger? When did families feel safer? When did our economy thrive? The answer was unspoken, yet undeniable. I am not standing here as a politician, she continued, her voice quivering with raw passion. I am standing here as an American who loves this country too much to let it fall. She looked straight into the cameras, straight into the living rooms of millions watching. This is not about left or right. This is about saving the American dream. Her voice broke just for a second. President Trump is here to fight for you. A single tear slid down the cheek of a mother watching from her couch. And in that moment, the nation knew. Something had changed. Karoline Leavitt had not just delivered a press briefing. She had delivered a reckoning. The room felt smaller now, as if the very walls were closing in around them. No one could escape the weight of Karoline Leavitt's words. She took a deep breath and let her next words cut through the silence like a blade. The American people were not just misled, she said. They were used. A few gasps. A journalist in the front row shifted uncomfortably. Karoline pressed forward. Karine Jean-Pierre stood here week after week, acting as if things were fine. As if American families weren't breaking under the weight of inflation. As if crime wasn't destroying communities. As if border security wasn't a crisis. She exhaled, her voice shaking with emotion. The previous administration cared more about looking good on television than actually making life better for Americans. A pin could have dropped. For them, it was about power. For President Trump, it's about people. A tear welled in the eye of a single mother watching from her small kitchen. She gripped the edge of the counter, listening intently. For too long, this government has ignored you, Karoline said, her voice breaking slightly. But under this administration, you will never be forgotten again. The cameras zoomed in, capturing Karoline's face. Strong, determined, but visibly emotional. She took a deep breath. I have spoken to Americans who have lost everything. A pause. The room seemed to hold its breath. I have sat with mothers who could not afford milk for their children. Fathers who lost their jobs and their dignity. Families torn apart by crime, by drugs, by policies that prioritized foreign interests over American lives. A single sniffle echoed from the back of the room. A reporter quickly wiped his face. And what did the last administration do? Karoline continued. They laughed. They called it temporary. They pretended the suffering wasn't real. She slammed her hand on the podium. But it was real. The force of her words sent a shockwave through the room. It was real for the mother crying in her car because she couldn't afford gas. It was real for the small business owner forced to close his doors. It was real for the children who went to bed hungry. Karoline's voice cracked. No more. A single tear slipped down the cheek of a journalist. Another sniffled. The weight of reality had never felt heavier. Karoline steadied herself. America is done waiting for someone to save it. America is taking its future back. She let the words settle, the truth slicing through the tension. Under President Trump, there will be no more empty speeches, no more meaningless words, no more leaders who hide behind binders and rehearse talking points. She exhaled. This administration is about action. A reporter leaned forward, his voice hesitant. Miss Leavitt, what message do you have for those who still doubt President Trump's leadership? Karoline turned, looking directly into the cameras. My message is simple, she said. Watch. A powerful silence followed. She leaned in. Watch as the economy recovers. Watch as crime goes down. Watch as jobs return, as families thrive, as America becomes strong again. Her voice softened. Watch as the lies you were told crumble. Watch as hope returns to this country. A single mother wiped tears from her eyes. A veteran watching from his small apartment clenched his fist. Karoline smiled. Because this is only the beginning. Karoline Leavitt looked across the room, her eyes scanning every face. The press, once dismissive, now hung on her every word. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the sheer weight of the moment. She inhaled deeply. For too long, the American people have been told to sit down and accept failure, to accept weak leadership, to accept that things will never get better. Her voice softened, but her message remained powerful. President Trump doesn't believe in accepting failure. He believes in fixing it. A murmur spread through the press room. Karoline's voice cracked slightly as she continued. I have seen parents break down because they can't afford to give their children the life they deserve. I have spoken to law enforcement officers who feel abandoned. I have met veterans who wonder if their service even mattered. She clenched her jaw, swallowing the emotion rising in her throat. The previous administration abandoned these people. A journalist let out a shaky breath. Another wiped their eyes. The weight of reality pressed down on everyone in that room. But today, America wakes up. Her words rang through the air like a bell signaling a new dawn. Karoline adjusted the microphone, her grip firm. The weight of truth was heavy, but she refused to waver. The people who built this country, the workers, the families, the soldiers, the small business owners, deserve better than empty words and political games. Her eyes welled up, but she held her composure. I have met a mother who lost her son to crime because politicians refused to secure our streets. A pause. I have met a farmer who lost everything because of reckless policies that drove his costs through the roof. Another pause. I have met a father who was forced to take 3 jobs just to survive. A sniffle was heard from the back of the room. Karoline's message was no longer just political. It was human. This administration, she said, her voice thick with emotion, will not forget them. She exhaled. I will stand at this podium day after day, and I will remind every single person in this country that they matter, that America is strong, that President Trump is here for them. A tear slipped down a journalist's cheek. Another reporter put their pen down, no longer writing, just listening. Because for the first time in years, the truth was finally being told. Karoline took a deep breath, looking straight into the cameras. The previous administration stood behind this podium and told America to settle for less. She shook her head. I stand here today to tell you, never again. Her voice grew firm. Under President Trump, we will restore our nation's economy, our security, and most importantly, our pride. She leaned forward. We are no longer a nation that apologizes for being great. We are a nation that fights for what is right. The silence in the room was deafening. America is back. A wave of emotion spread through the room. Reporters who had spent years ignoring the truth now felt it deep in their bones. Viewers at home, watching through their screens, sat in stunned silence, many with tears streaming down their faces. Karoline let out a small smile. And this is only the beginning. She stepped back from the podium, her final words echoing through every household, every heart, every soul. God bless America. The press room erupted. Some clapped. Others sat motionless, too moved to react. And millions watching from home felt something they hadn't in a long time. Hope. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something, if it made you believe again in the strength of America, like this video, subscribe to my channel for more powerful content, comment below with your thoughts. Tell me, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Let's talk about it. This is not just a story, this is a movement.